In this podcast, we will explore products distributed by Cotelec, a French leader in the component testing market. The sources are presentation documents from the company ENGMATEC, used to study the different interfaces and connectors used in consumer and industrial electronics. You will discover the technical features, standards, versions, and applications of these connectors, as well as the benefits of these products. For any information, please contact Cotelec engineers.
All right, ready to decode the wild world of connectors and make sure you're always plugging in with confidence.
Sounds like a plan.
Looks like someone handed us the textbook on USB, HDMI, and DisplayPort. Time for a deep dive.
You've definitely chosen a topic with more depth than most people realize.
I'm ready to go from fumbling with cables in the dark to feeling like a total pro. Where do we even begin?
Well, no connector deep dive would be complete without exploring the ubiquitous USB.
Oh, the good old USB. Stands for Universal Serial Bus, right?
It does.
Though I've encountered moments where it felt anything but too universal.
You're not alone there.
I swear I can never tell which way's up with those things.
Happens to the best of us.
And don't even get me started on trying to find the right cable in my drawer of doom.
That's a common experience, believe me. When USB first hit the scene, it really did aim to simplify connections. The idea was to have one standard that would work across all sorts of devices, and it's come a long way, but it's also had a bit of an identity crisis along the way.
An identity crisis? Is that what we're calling the fact that there are like a million different USB types?
Pretty much. You've got your classic rectangular Type A.
So one that's everywhere, right?
Exactly. That's probably what most people picture when they think USB port. Then there's the Type B, which is more square-shaped.
Oh yeah, those are usually on printers and things, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. Printers and scanners, you got it.
And things got even smaller, right? Mini USB.
Right.
And then micro USB. I feel like I lived through both of those phases.
You did. As devices, especially mobile phones and tablets, got smaller, so did the connectors.
Makes sense.
Mini USB and then micro USB became the go-to for a while, but they still had the which way is up problem. And that's where USB Type-C comes in.
Ah, yes, Type-C, the supposed savior of our sanity. It's supposed to be reversible, handle data and power, and basically usher in a new era of connector bliss, right?
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it's gaining serious traction. In fact, the European Union is making a big push for USB-C to be the standard charging port for all new mobile devices.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's not just about convenience anymore. It's about reducing electronic waste and simplifying things for consumers. This little connector is at the center of a much bigger story.
Absolutely. It highlights how these seemingly small technological choices can have major implications. But even with the rise of Type-C, we're still dealing with the legacy of all those other USB types. And believe it or not, there are different speeds within each type.
Wait, different speeds too.
Yeah.
So even if I find the right type of USB cable, it might not be the fastest option. This is getting complicated.
Don't worry, it's not as daunting as it seems. You've probably heard of USB 2.0 and 3.0, maybe even 3.1 and 3.2. Each of those represents a generation of USB technology with faster data transfer speeds.
Okay, so USB 3. Something is always going to be faster than 2.0. That makes sense. But is there a way to tell just by looking at a cable what speed it supports?
Usually there are markings on the cable or the connector itself. You might see USB 3.0 printed on it, or sometimes they use different colors to indicate the speed. Blue often indicates USB 3.0 or higher.
Good to know. I'm already feeling more confident about deciphering these little guys. But let's be honest, no matter how fast a cable is, it's useless if it falls apart after a few uses.
You are absolutely right. And that's something that often gets overlooked.
It does feel like charging cables just disintegrate these days.
Right. There's a surprising amount of engineering that goes into making sure these connectors can withstand the wear and tear of daily life.
Wait, really? I've always just assumed they were designed to be disposable.
While it might feel that way sometimes, especially if you've gone through a lot of charging cables, most USB connectors undergo rigorous testing to ensure their durability.
Okay, now I'm really curious. What kind of testing are we talking about here?
Well, they have these specialized test plugs made from really tough materials, and they use them to simulate years of use in a compressed time frame.
So they're like brutally plugging and unplugging these things thousands of times.
Pretty much. They call it mating cycles. Basically, it measures how many times you can plug and unplug the connector before it starts to wear down.
Mating cycles. I never knew there was a technical term for that. So how many mating cycles are we talking about before a typical USB connector calls it quits?
In this podcast, we will explore products distributed by Cotelec, a French leader in the component testing market. The sources are presentation documents from the company ENGMATEC, used to study the different interfaces and connectors used in consumer and industrial electronics. You will discover the technical features, standards, versions, and applications of these connectors, as well as the benefits of these products. For any information, please contact Cotelec engineers.
Well, it depends on the type of connector. The standard USB connectors, like your Type A and Type B, are usually tested for at least 1,500 mating cycles.
1,500? That seems like a lot. I'm not sure I've plugged and unplugged anything that many times in my life.
You might be surprised. But it gets even more impressive. The smaller connectors, like the mini and micro USB, are designed for even more abuse. Mini USB connectors get tested for around 5,000 cycles.
5,000.
And those tiny micro USBs, they're built to handle a staggering 10,000 cycles.
10,000? That's wild. Makes you realize there's more to these connectors than meets the eye.
Exactly. And speaking of things that are more than meets the eye, let's switch gears from the workhorse that is USB to the world of high-definition audio and video, HDMI.
All right, HDMI, that's high-definition multimedia interface, for those playing along at home. It's the cable that rules my living room. But I'll admit, all those different versions and types have always confused me.
It's definitely another area where a little knowledge can go a long way. HDMI has become the gold standard for connecting devices like Blu-ray players, gaming consoles, and streaming sticks to our TVs. It's designed to deliver high-quality audio and video signals with a single cable. No more mess of red, white, and yellow cables.
Oh, those RCA cables. A true blast from the past. HDMI was a game changer for simplifying things, that's for sure. But then I started seeing things like HDMI 1.4 versus HDMI 2.0, and even different types like Type A and Type B. Can you break that down for me?
Of course. Let's start with the types. Type A is the most common one. You see the one with 19 pins. It handles all the standard audio and video signals, plus some control functions. Type B, with its 29 pins, was designed for even higher resolutions, but it never really caught on.
So Type B is kind of like the Betamax of the HDMI world.
Exactly. As technology advanced, newer versions of Type A HDMI were able to handle the higher bandwidths that Type B was initially intended for, made Type B pretty much obsolete.
That makes sense. So what about all the different versions then? What's the difference between, say, HDMI 1.4 and the latest and greatest, which I think is 2.1?
It all comes down to bandwidth and features. Each new version of HDMI brings support for higher resolutions, faster refresh rates, and new features. For example, HDMI 1.4 was the first to support 4K resolution, but it was limited to 30 frames per second. HDMI 2.0 bumped that up to 60 frames per second and added support for HDR, which dramatically improves the contrast and color range of the image.
Okay, so higher numbers mean better picture quality, basically.
Essentially, yes. And then there's HDMI 2.1, which is the latest and greatest. It supports resolutions up to 10K, which is pretty mind-blowing, along with features like dynamic HDR and even faster refresh rates for incredibly smooth motion.
10K? Seriously? I'm still trying to wrap my head around 4K. But with all these new versions and features, it makes you wonder, do you need a new HDMI cable every time you get a new TV or device?
That's a great question, and the answer isn't always straightforward. In some cases, an older HDMI cable might work just fine, even with a newer device. But if you want to take advantage of all the bells and whistles like 4K resolution, HDR, and high refresh rates, then yes, you'll need a cable that supports those features.
So how am I supposed to know which HDMI cable is the right one? It feels like you need a degree in engineering just to buy the right cable these days.
It definitely can feel that way, but there are a few things to keep in mind. First, check the specs of your devices. What HDMI version do they support? Then look for a cable that's certified for that version or higher. You'll usually see it printed right on the cable.
All right, so always check the specs. That's good advice for pretty much anything tech-related, it seems. But I have to admit, when it comes to HDMI, I've always been more focused on the picture quality and haven't given much thought to the audio side of things.
And that's understandable. But HDMI isn't just about video. It also carries high-quality audio signals. And there are some really cool features packed in there that most people don't even realize exist.
Like what? Give me the inside scoop. I'm all about those hidden features.
In this podcast, we will explore products distributed by Cotelec, a French leader in the component testing market. The sources are presentation documents from the company ENGMATEC, used to study the different interfaces and connectors used in consumer and industrial electronics. You will discover the technical features, standards, versions, and applications of these connectors, as well as the benefits of these products. For any information, please contact Cotelec engineers.
Well, have you ever heard of ARC? It stands for Audio Return Channel, and it's a feature that allows your TV to send audio signals back through the HDMI cable to a compatible soundbar or receiver.
Wait, so instead of having a separate audio cable running from my TV to my soundbar, I can just use the same HDMI cable that's already carrying the video signal.
Exactly. It simplifies your setup, reduces cable clutter, and can even improve audio quality in some cases.
Okay, that's seriously cool. I can't believe I never knew about this before. Is there anything else my HDMI cable can do that I'm missing out on?
There's another cool feature called HEC, which stands for HDMI Ethernet channel. It allows for a network connection to be established between two devices using, you guessed it, the HDMI cable.
So my HDMI cable is like a secret agent carrying all sorts of hidden information. I start to think I've underestimated these things.
It's true. We often take these cables for granted, but they're doing a lot more than meets the eye.
This is all great stuff about HDMI, but I know there's another player in the world of digital displays, and that's DisplayPort. It always seemed like the more mysterious professional cousin of HDMI. What's the deal with DisplayPort?
You're right. DisplayPort often flies under the radar for everyday users, but it's a powerhouse in its own right, especially in professional settings.
Okay, so tell me, what makes DisplayPort the choice for the pros? What sets it apart from HDMI? So DisplayPort is like the sports car of connectors then, built for speed and high performance.
That's a great analogy. DisplayPort is known for its high bandwidth capabilities.
So we're talking even higher resolutions and refresh rates than HDMI.
You got it. It's often the preferred choice for things like high-end gaming, professional video editing, and CAD applications where every frame and pixel counts.
So when we're talking about pushing the limits of resolution and refresh rates, DisplayPort is the way to go. What kind of resolutions are we even talking about here? Higher than 10K?
Yes, DisplayPort can actually support resolutions up to 8K and beyond with refresh rates that'll make your head spin. But it's not just about raw power. DisplayPort also has some unique tricks up its sleeve. One of the coolest is something called multi-stream transport, or MST.
MST. Okay, you definitely piqued my curiosity.
Right.
What makes this MST feature so special?
Well, imagine being able to connect multiple monitors to your computer using just one DisplayPort cable. That's what MST allows you to do.
Really?
Yep. It's like having a daisy chain of displays all powered by a single connection from your computer.
Wow, that would be incredibly useful, especially in a professional setting where you might have dual or even triple monitor setups. No more cable clutter behind the desk.
Exactly. And for professionals who rely on multiple displays for their work, that kind of streamlined setup can be a game changer. But even with all its strengths, DisplayPort does have some limitations.
Okay, there's always a catch, right? What's the downside to DisplayPort?
Well, the main drawback is that it hasn't been as widely adopted in consumer electronics as HDMI.
Ah, so you're less likely to find it on TVs and things like that.
Exactly. You're less likely to find DisplayPort on TVs, especially compared to the ubiquity of HDMI.
So it's more of a niche player for now,
Yeah.
even though it has some really impressive capabilities.
That's a good way to put it. For the average user, HDMI is probably still the more practical and versatile choice for connecting to TVs and most consumer devices. But for those who demand the absolute highest performance and those cutting-edge features, DisplayPort is an incredible tool.
This deep dive into the world of connectors has been eye-opening. I feel like I've gone from fumbling in the dark to actually understanding what to look for. But with all these options, USB, HDMI, DisplayPort, choosing the right cable still feels like navigating a bit of a minefield. Any advice for our listeners on how to choose the best connector for their needs?
Absolutely. It all starts with understanding what you need the connection for. If it's for simple data transfer, like moving files between your computer and a flash drive, USB is your go-to. Look for USB 3.0 or higher for the fastest speeds. If you're dealing with audio and video, especially for high-definition content, HDMI is your best bet. Just make sure the cable and your devices both support the HDMI version that matches the resolution and features you need.
So for streaming 4K movies, I'd want to make sure I have an HDMI 2.0 cable or higher.
Exactly. And if you're a gamer or a creative professional working with multiple high-resolution displays, DisplayPort might be the way to go.
This has been incredibly helpful. Knowing what to look for and what those cryptic numbers and acronyms actually mean takes away so much of the guesswork. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we wrap things up?
Remember that technology is constantly evolving. What's considered cutting edge today might be outdated tomorrow, so when you're making decisions about connectors and cables, it's worth thinking about your future needs as well.
Future-proofing. That's excellent advice.
Yeah.
If you're investing in new tech, Think about what connections you might need down the line to avoid those moments of why doesn't this cable fit? Frustration. Well, I think we've thoroughly explored the ins and outs of connectors today. From the humble USB to the powerhouse that is DisplayPort, we've demystified the tech that keeps our digital lives connected.
We've gone from those initial feelings of being overwhelmed to feeling like we can confidently choose the right cable for any situation.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe the next time you're faced with a drawer full of cables, you won't feel that sense of dread, but rather a sense of, hey, I know what these things are now. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of connectors. Until next time.
In this podcast, we will explore products distributed by Cotelec, a French leader in the component testing market. The sources are presentation documents from the company ENGMATEC, used to study the different interfaces and connectors used in consumer and industrial electronics. You will discover the technical features, standards, versions, and applications of these connectors, as well as the benefits of these products. For any information, please contact Cotelec engineers.